the best bets, and Jason Page. This is the Cash In Early Edition.
Good to have you with us this September 11th, 2023. A lot to get to over the next 60 minutes, including Bill Bender of the Sporting News to talk college football. That's coming up. NFL Week 1. Every year, a team has a terrible Week 1 and then goes on and has a great season. Every year, a team has a terrible Week 1 in the regular season and goes on and has a great season. You just don't know. So we'll talk about that a little bit. The implosion of a major league franchise is on my mind. It's one we all saw coming. And my recollections on this 9/11. Where were you 22 years ago? Get to that as well. But we kick things off with college football, and we bring in our friend Bill Bender of the Sporting News to help us with that. Bill does a terrific job on all things college football for the Sporting News and joins us here on the program. Bill, look, start with this fantastic matchup we had this weekend with Alabama and Texas, and, you know, a bit of revenge, obviously, for Steve Sarkisian with the way last year's game went and Quinn Ewers getting hurt. What was most illuminating for you in what you saw through 4 quarters between these two teams?
Yeah, the separation at quarterback. Quinn Ewers' ability to throw the ball down the field consistently, and that was something we thought was a key to the game, and Alabama's inability to do that. They had a missed touchdown by Jalen Milroe on a wheel route. It was the same habits they had last year that resurfaced. 90 yards in penalties, same as last year. The only difference was this time Texas was able to score 21 points on 11 plays, pull away, stayed aggressive the entire game, and it's not often we see Alabama vulnerable like that at home. So I came away more impressed with Texas, and Alabama's still got a ton of talent and they're close, but their quarterback situation is the difference.
Do you see a lot of other teams that have the profile of a Texas that are in the Alabama schedule that are going to be able to give them the kind of problems that Texas did?
Well, they're going to have other games at home, right? And the SEC's struggling right now. LSU didn't look good in Week 1. Texas A&M lost to Miami in Week 2. So those are 2 games that supposedly would be huge stage games for the Crimson Tide that won't be now. They play Tennessee at home. They play Ole Miss in a couple weeks at home. And that's a game that's going to be interesting because Lane has a pretty solid team. I don't think any of those teams I mentioned, with the exception of maybe Tennessee, has enough on the same amount of talent on the offensive side of the ball. LSU's solid, but they don't have the receivers that Texas does. And they don't have a tight end like Jatavian Sanders. So, Alabama's going to be tested. It's a long way for them to get to 11-1 and potentially get a shot in the SEC championship game.
Does Texas to you early on look like a championship contender?
Well, they look like a playoff contender for sure. And I don't, sorting out championship contenders other than Georgia right now is tough because I think Florida State looked awesome in Week 1. I think Texas looked awesome in Week 2, but these are schools that are going to have to weather this over the entire season. Florida State.
Yeah, no, go ahead. No, finish your point.
We can get right off Florida State bandwagon if they lose to Clemson next week. So, and Texas, look at their next 3 games, right? They play Baylor, Kansas. That's a trap game ahead of Oklahoma.
Put into perspective what Steve Sarkisian's done in a relatively short time at Texas. Coming off the stint as an assistant under Saban, the troubles before that, what he's been able to do in such a short period of time that sort of, I guess, raised his level in the coaching ranks. We already knew he was a great coach, but what he's done here over the last couple of years.
Oh, great offensive mind, aggressive, battled personal issues, and that's well documented. But I tell people this all the time. I'm not afraid to say this. I'm the son of a alcoholic father, and he battled those demons. So when you see somebody come out of it, it's a good thing. And I'm actually, as a person, I think that's awesome for Steve Sarkisian. And then the way that he's been aggressive and play calling, it was aggressive. They didn't play to a lot of teams go into Alabama, they go in and they tighten up, whatever phrase you want to use, that it happens. So for me, I thought I was very impressed with Texas, very impressed with him. And people are saying Texas is back now, not sarcastically or with some Twitter meme or something like that. They should mean it. It's a really good football team.
Bill Bender of the Sporting News hanging out with us on the Cash In. Shift to Deion Sanders and Colorado. We thought after what we saw in week one, they'd be a favorite against Nebraska. We thought they'd win that game. They win it going away. They're still talking about getting their respect, playing with that chip on their shoulder. It's sort of a theme for the season. I couldn't help but sort of laugh, though. I mean, fans storming the field, and I had some fun at the expense of Colorado fans on X. And you got to troll it a little bit. I mean, it's game number 2 of the season. You're playing against a Nebraska team that's not very good. I guess that's a me problem to some extent. It just devalues the whole thing about storming the field. But back to Colorado and sort of what they've done through the first 2 weeks. How sustainable is the way they play when they get into the meat of their conference schedule?
No, they're going to beat Colorado State this week. They're going to be 3-0, and then we're really going to find. I think we're all kind of waiting for them to find out, and they're going to find out one way or the other against Oregon and against USC. I mean, those are elite offenses, established Pac-12 powers, have elite quarterbacks in Bo Nix and especially Caleb Williams with what he's done so far this year.
And the Pac-12's been very good early on. You were mentioning, conferences playing well. Yeah,
all of them. I mean, Cam Ward's playing well. DJU's playing well at Oregon State. Dante Moore broke out last week for UCLA. So that's when we'll find out when they play those teams. But what Shedeur Sanders has done, what Travis Hunter has done, what's Deion's done. I use the analogy when the Miami Hurricanes, and I grew up in Ohio, the Miami Hurricanes were the cool team in the 80s, like that people wore their gear and those kind of things at school. He's turned Colorado into the cool school in 2 weeks. There's no question, which is crazy.
It is crazy. I got to ask you this, and I don't know how much of this you know without being, right on the inside or how much any of it knows. Phil Jackson was one of the most iconic coaches in NBA history. One of the things about Phil Jackson, though, was he wasn't really an X's and O's guy. He had Tex Winter. He had assistants on the bench who helped him do that. He got into the minds of players. He knew how to motivate guys, but he wasn't an X's and O's guy. How much of Deion Sanders' coaching ability is about his ability to connect with players, to get inside their minds? I was watching a viral video in the bathroom this morning, of all places, of Deion in this speech he gave a couple of days before the game against Nebraska, where he's getting into their minds about, Buster Douglas and Luna Pearl and how he beat Mike Tyson and all of this stuff. And he's talking about having them wear suits and all of this and that. And I was watching this and I'm saying, how much of this guy and his ability to coach this team is that part of it versus the X's and O's and just having a great staff around him?
Well, I mean, he did build a great staff. I mean, Sean Lewis was a head coach at Kent State. They ran an up-tempo offense. I think the fact that Deion chose him was a big deal. Defensively, same deal. They've got experienced coaches. I think Deion, I mean, I can't answer that question with super knowledge. Like I haven't sat in a film room with him. But I always said if I was going to learn cornerback technique as a defensive back, why wouldn't you want to learn it from him? He's the best cover corner in my lifetime. It's not close. So I think those things, and plus the ability to motivate, the chip on the shoulder thing, the theatrics in the press conference, I think those are by design. He's not like going after reporters. That's what I think some reporters are missing the point, because some of us can be, let's be honest, a little sanctimonious. He's riling up. He's going through a reporter to reach his team, because everybody's like, oh my gosh, look at Deion, he, doing this. But I always kind of scoff at the chip on the shoulder, those kind of things. That's for a locker room and that's for them. But for me, it's like, if he would ask me, do I believe? I was like, does it matter? It doesn't matter if I believe or not. What matters is the guys in your locker room.
Talking with Bill Bender, the Sporting News does a great job on college football. The situation involving Mel Tucker at Michigan State, the school knew about this in December, right? They've been investigating him. In July, the AD said he wasn't going to suspend Tucker because he wanted to let the process finish. Now he's suspended. Is this just because of optics? And should we be crushing Michigan State for the fact that they're doing this now when they should have probably done it a while ago if they were going to do it now?
Well, Mark D'Antonio resigned under NCAA allegations. This is I'm not going to compare what's going on here.
And now D'Antonio's back.
Yeah, right. He's helping now. And this is a school that went through the Larry Nassar scandal. And now this. And, Brenda Tracy this isn't the only campus she was advocating and doing these things on. So it's very just, last thing I would have expected to see on my timeline early Sunday morning. The details are what they are. There's no cutting around that. I don't think Mel Tucker is going to coach another game at Michigan State. And I think similar to Northwestern, which is an entirely different scandal and an entirely different set of circumstances, I think they should clean the house at the end of the year. Clean it entirely, bring in a new coaching staff and new personnel people, all those kind of things, and try to get it going in the right direction.
Well, this is what drives me nuts about, not to totally shift gears here, but that's what drives me nuts about Northwestern. How did you not just clean house? How do you leave the defensive coordinator in there to become the head coach when you're going to argue the head coach knew and the defensive coordinator didn't know, or the head coach should have known? And it blows my mind how you kept the defensive coordinator in place when you should have just cleaned house.
Right. And they will at the end of this year. And, there's a guy for both of these places. Mike Elko's stock is going up. I think Duke plays Northwestern this weekend. So, it would be a matter of what does Mike Elko want? I think he's going to be one of the hot coaching candidates. Michigan State's an admittedly tough job. That's a place where Nick Saban's coached. That's a place where Luke Fickell turned down. And that is a place, for better or worse, and Mark D'Antonio mastered this, where you are operating in Michigan's shadow to some extent. Even when you beat Michigan, Michigan's the story. So I think whoever they find to take that job is going to have a lot to do on and off the field so this doesn't happen again.
Bill Bender does a great job on college football, the Sporting News. Look forward to doing it again soon. Thank you, my friend.
Hey, no problem, Jason. Appreciate it.
Stick around. We got more to do. The Cash In rolls along on this Monday. Thanks, Bill.
Hey, no problem, Nathan.
You well.
I appreciate it. Take care.
continue on this Monday edition of The Cash In. If you are not following us, subscribe to the podcast on Spotify. Just look for it there. The Cash In Daily. Sam Yarnell is off today, by the way. I forgot to mention that at the top of the show. He will return tomorrow. He's a busy man. Thanks to Bill Bender for hanging out with us on the podcast and on the show. If you want to watch us, we're live daily at noon Eastern. A few minutes late today, but noon Eastern generally. Over on Twitch, Jason Page 77. Over on X at the back page. And on Facebook and YouTube, just look for The Cash In. And you'll find us. The college football was interesting this weekend. The Deion Sanders thing, it really is, it is kind of curious to me. How much of the X's and O's, or how much is he just giving, autonomy to his offensive and defensive coordinator and just sitting back and helping guys where he can as a Hall of Fame player? But in terms of the tactical aspect of the game, how much of it is Deion? And I'm not saying that to knock him. I'm just asking the question. If anybody has the answer, I'm more than willing to listen. Week 1 of the NFL is almost in the books. We got one more game tonight. Bills and the Jets, which I know Sam will have a keen interest in, and we'll talk about with him tomorrow when he returns to the show. But week 1 can set a tone, right? Look at the Broncos last year. Oh, what was it, Seattle in week 1? Nathaniel Hackett, his first game as the head coach. Russell Wilson doing his thing, and everybody so excited about the future of the Broncos franchise. They finally got a quarterback to pair with that great defense. And remember the way that game ended last year? Brandon McManus, 60-something yard field goal attempt, and not putting the ball in Russell Wilson's hands. And it just felt like that one game set a tone for the entire season in Denver. And you saw the way it went. It was a disaster. Nathaniel Hackett lost his job. Now he's with the Jets. Godspeed. So it could set a tone, right? Game 1 can set a tone. But then you could also make the argument, well, the Bears beat the 49ers in week 1, 19-10. And where were the Bears by the end of the year? It's a miserable season. Another miserable season. Yes, Justin Fields started to progress, and you started to get a sense for what he could do as a starting quarterback in this league. But at the end of the day, it was another wins and loss-wise season. It was just a disaster. And you sort of wonder about Chicago this year, because it didn't matter if Aaron Rodgers was there. They got dusted by the Packers again, who I think are 10-0 now under Matt LaFleur against the Chicago Bears. I mean, that's astonishing. This isn't even a rivalry anymore. I remember years ago, small school, Division I college basketball program in Connecticut, Central Connecticut State University. Used to play against Quinnipiac. And Quinnipiac had just become Division I. Tom Moore was the head coach. Howie Dickerman was the head coach at Central Connecticut State University. He was a longtime assistant under Jim Calhoun at UConn. Tom Moore was an assistant at UConn under Jim Calhoun. Anyway, they would play each other, and it was this new rivalry. And Central used to always get the best of Quinnipiac. And Tom Moore we'd ask Tom Moore about the rivalry, and he says, it's not a rivalry until one team starts beating the other. Both teams have to beat each other for it to be a rivalry. And that's kind of what it reminds me of watching the Bears and the Packers right now. It's one-sided. It's not a rivalry. To have a rivalry, you've got to have the other team's got to have a shot. And right now, the Bears don't even have a puncher's chance against the Packers for whatever reason. And Jordan Love looked good. I don't know if he put together the kind of game that tells you, well, they've got their next installment of the franchise quarterback. I don't know if game 1 against the Bears gives you that information, but it told you he can play. There was a lot of rack yards in that game. And his progression will continue throughout the season. I think he's going to be fine. I think he's going to be above average at worst. And we'll see about the rest. So you had the Bears beat the Niners last year in week 1, and it went terrible. You had the Broncos lose last year in week 1, and it went terrible. So it can go either way. Which brings me to one of the most inexplicable week 1 performances I can ever remember. And again, I don't do hyperbole. I leave that to the loudmouths that you see on television every day. The most inexplicable performance of week 1 has to be the Giants. And I don't care about the weather. Both teams are playing in the same damn weather. And again, you think about the Giants, who were not expected to do big things last year. Ryan Daboll, first year as head coach. Game 1 against the Titans, you think about last year. It set the tone for the whole season. Going with the riverboat gambler, going for 2, getting the win on the road in Tennessee. It set the tone, and the Giants had themselves a good season. Not a great season, but a good season, and they won a playoff game, which nobody would have predicted before last year started. Giants go on, playoffs, we know the rest. And then they go give Daniel Jones this big contract in the offseason. Daniel Jones had no chance yesterday. And fans were booing and all of this. That game's not on Daniel Jones. That game is on the Giants' embarrassing performance at the point of attack on the offensive line. And we know the Cowboys are good defensively. But how do the Giants look that bad in week 1? How do the Giants just flat out quit? That offensive line, they quit in week 1. That raises giant red flags to me about this team. And I don't know about the head coach or any of that, but from the composition of the roster, that you could consistently get beaten like a drum all night at the point of attack. That's disconcerting. Look, I knew the Cowboys were good. If you listened last Friday, I told you the Cowboys are going to win the NFC East. And it was much to the chagrin of our neophyte Sam Yarnell when I said that. But the Cowboys are going to win that division. Much like the 49ers, the Cowboys have a lot of good pieces in place at a lot of the positions not called quarterback. And the only question for them is whether or not Dak Prescott can improve upon a miserable 2022 in which he led the league in interceptions despite the fact that he missed 4 or 5 games. But the Giants got embarrassed last night, and I don't know where that leaves them after one game. Chris Collinsworth's on there saying, hey, it doesn't count, for a loss and a half if you lose by 40 or anything like that. But it sure as hell could set a tone for a season. I mean, you've got to have guys in the locker room scratching their heads saying, this is not what we were supposed to be. So you have the Giants who lay an egg in week 1. Where does their season go from here? Then you have the Bengals who get embarrassed by the Browns in Cleveland. Now, if you listened to the show last week on Friday, Page versus the Prince, I went 2-2 on my picks, by the way. Sam Yarnell went 3-1. So he's up on me by a game after week 1. But you watch the Bengals game, and I'm less alarmed about the Bengals because, 1, go look at what they've done over the last 2 seasons with this roster of players, this group of players. And 2, Joe Burrow barely played in the preseason. Now, that game gives you something to be excited about if you're a Browns fan, and that's great because they get a full season with Deshaun Watson. I don't care what you think of them. They get a full season with Deshaun Watson. And I think Cleveland's going to be decent. I think that division's going to be decent. Even though Baltimore didn't wow me yesterday. I don't care what the final score was. Lamar Jackson was sloppy with the football. Fumbled one away, could have fumbled another away. They didn't have Mark Andrews, granted. And a win is a win, but a little shaky performance by Baltimore. Again, it's week 1. But if you take the two dismal performances of teams that were in the playoffs last year and ask me which one I'm more concerned about, it has to be the Giants. Because that is inexplicable at home. A lot of emotion in the building. The ceremonies for commemorating 9/11, which we'll talk about later in the show. To play that bad, I just don't get it. By the way, the Ravens lose J.K. Dobbins for the season with a torn Achilles. Do you think they're making a call to the Colts for Jonathan Taylor? I mean, that has to be what the Colts were waiting for, was a situation like that. Another team loses a star running back, and boom. Now, they got Justice Hill, who played pretty well yesterday in Dobbins' stead, but that's not Jonathan Taylor. And I don't know what kind of assets the Browns have, the Ravens have, and how they would make a deal like that happen. But I just have to ask the question out loud. Is that the direction the Ravens opt to go? We'll have to wait and see. Jets and the Bills tonight. I can't wait. I'll kick my feet up, get a bowl of popcorn. It's the Jets, so you never know what you're going to get. I don't care what players are there, what the cast looks like. It's the Jets. It can't be worse than the Giants, right? We're coming back. I got to get into some baseball stuff on the other side. What a mess. One Major League Baseball organization is imploding. And I told you so. That's next on The Cash In. Stay with us. We continue Monday edition of the Cash In Daily, September 11th, 2023. Coming up in 15 minutes, we'll talk about this fateful day 22 years ago. That's coming up. I don't want to say I told you so. Actually, I kind of do. Because, I mean, this is the equivalent. This is the equivalent of if the Titanic had seen the iceberg, right? This is the equivalent of if the Titanic had seen the iceberg and instead of slowing down the ship and turning, decided to speed up and go straight at the iceberg. That is what the Los Angeles Angels have become. They are the cruise ship in the Arctic going straight for the iceberg and saying, oh, no, we're not going to back off. We're going to go full steam into that iceberg and just see how badly we can tear this ship apart. That's the only way to describe what's going on right now in Anaheim. You don't trade Shohei Ohtani when you have the chance. You trade away some of the minor league assets you do have to go and get guys to make a run, and then you offload all those guys because you don't have to pay the luxury tax to, teams around baseball that aren't, spending any money. You don't want to pay that if you're Artie Moreno, so you say, all right, we're going to cut our losses to some extent. We're going to ship off all these guys we traded for, and we're going to try to, we're still going to try to keep Shohei Ohtani. There's no way Ohtani's going to stay in that situation. And what did I say weeks ago? We had Brian Kenny on the show, and I said it. I've said it to Bob Nightingale. I will say it again, and I'm being proven right. And I don't want to be right. There's nothing great about seeing a franchise implode. Maybe it provides the impetus for Artie Moreno to get out and put that thing in the hands of somebody who's capable and qualified and isn't worried about the bottom line necessarily and is worried about trying to build a winner and actually competing with the team in their own area like the Dodgers. I don't know. But I told all of you that this wasn't just going to be Ohtani leaving, that it could be Trout leaving too. And as much as Ohtani has meant to this franchise over the last several years, Mike Trout's meant that over a decade. And now you get the story yesterday that Angels brass has said, hey, if Mike Trout wants to ask for a trade, we're going to accommodate him. That's the end. That's the end of that franchise. People go to that ballpark right now to see Shohei Ohtani. They used to go there to see Mike Trout, arguably the best player of this generation. Certainly one of them. And now you're talking about both of them potentially being gone in the same offseason. Now, I don't know who's going to give up what to get a Mike Trout that, let's face it, and I love Mike Trout. He's an amazing player. He is a broken down version of the Mike Trout we once knew. So I don't know how much you give up and what the Angels think they can get for Mike Trout at this stage of his career when he can't stay on the field. I could sit here and go give you the numbers. Trout is just not a guy that's able to stay healthy. Here, baseball reference. Here's Mike Trout. I'll do this live on the show right now for those of you that are watching. But the numbers don't lie when it comes to Trout. He hasn't played a full season since 2019. 2020. 2021, 36 games. 2022, 119 games. This year, he's played 82 games. And again, you're talking about one of the greatest players in the history. One of the greatest players in the history of the game. Certainly one of the greatest of this generation. But he just can't stay healthy. And now you've got the organization planting the seeds for his exit from the franchise. And if I had to guess, Trout would be the kind of guy that winds up on the East Coast. I would think. But we'll have to wait and see. Just the latest in a long line of failures by this Angels organization under Artie Moreno, but you're certainly starting to feel like this could be the beginning of the end of Mike Trout in Los Angeles. One trip to the postseason, 2014. One trip. I don't want to say speaking of franchises that are imploding, but the Yankees were starting to look like they were actually going to go on a little run here to end the season. And then they lose the first two to Milwaukee. They lose three in a row. They lost, I think, the final game of their series against Detroit. They lose the first two against Milwaukee. Then on Sunday, you get this curious note about Jason Dominguez being out of the lineup with some inflammation in his elbow. Then the Yankees get no hit for 10 1/3 innings against the Brewers and somehow win the game 4-3. Neither here nor there. It's, whatever. And then after the game, we learn the reason Jason Dominguez, their star prospect who has shown so many great signs, is going to be out for a long time. Tommy John surgery, likely but not certain. A torn UCL in his throwing elbow. And that's it for Jason Dominguez. As excited, this is as excited as I've seen a Yankee fan base. Forget Anthony Volpe. This is a whole new level. The Martian was something different. And you saw it in his numbers when he came up. The guy's hitting home runs off Justin Verlander in Houston. He's hitting home runs in the Bronx. He can run. He can hit. He can do everything. He's literally the five-tool player. He's the quintessential everything guy. And the future of this franchise. Now, there have been examples of guys who have missed as little as 5 months. Bryce Harper. There have been guys who have missed 7 months. Shohei Ohtani. Because, again, you're not a pitcher. You can come back and be a DH and then gradually work your way back into the field. There are some who believe Jason Dominguez could be back early next season for the Yankees. He's young enough. He's 20. So we'll have to wait and see. And the little sniff that he got of Major League Baseball has to have him motivated to rehab this thing aggressively. But at the same time, are the Yankees going to say, we want to take our time because he's the future of the franchise? And how does that potentially change their offseason plans as it relates to addressing their needs for an outfielder? Because they have issues in the outfield. Let's just face it. After Aaron Judge, Harrison Bader didn't work out. Aaron Hicks got sent packing. They're trying out Everson Pereira. The Yankees have to figure out what they're doing with their outfield aside from Aaron Judge. Obviously, Jason Dominguez plays into the long-term plans. He's your future center fielder. But if he's not ready, what do you do to start next season if you're the Yankees? That is a question that remains to be answered. But even on a day where the Yankees won yesterday, they still got some absolutely awful news with this Jason Dominguez injury and the time that he's obviously going to miss as a result. All right. I am not done. I've got one last thing I want to finish this program with today. I will do that coming back on the other side. 22 years ago today, the lives of so many were changed. All of our lives were changed. The world, there's just life pre 9/11. There's life post 9/11. I want to talk about it. Give you my recollections and how it even changed my life. And I was an hour and a half outside of New York City when 9/11 happened. We'll talk about that as we continue. Wrap up this edition of The Cash In. Thank you for being with us. The Cash In on this Monday, September 11th, 2023. It is hard to fathom that it's been 22 years since the terrorist attacks of 9/11. And every year I share the same story with whatever audience I'm speaking to, whether it's been on the radio, whether it's TV, whether it's podcasting, video streaming, whatever it may be. I always share the same story because it's important to remember, to reflect, to remember that day. So for some of you, this will be a rehash of the same story I've told for, I don't know, the last 14 years. For others, it'll be something you've never heard me talk about before. But I remember everything about that day as if it were yesterday. And it did actually change the trajectory of my career as well. Which is far less significant, obviously, than what transpired on that day. So I was a news anchor and a reporter for a small, not small, but actually, I shouldn't say small, for a large AM talk radio station in Danbury, Connecticut, which is in Fairfield County. It's just outside of New York City. It's about an hour and a half drive. You could do it a little faster if you're speeding, because I know I've done it. Just outside New York City to the north and east of the city. More northeast. And I was a news anchor there, but I was still living in East Haven, Connecticut. I was still living with my parents. This was 22 years ago. I was 23 years old. And I remember getting in the car that day and driving from our home in East Haven to Danbury, which is about a 45-minute drive every day, each way. And I got in the car, and I got about a mile from my parents' house. And I got to the bottom of the street, and Don Imus in the Morning, very famous, nationally syndicated morning radio host, shock jock in his earlier days. He was on WFAN in New York. And Don Imus was on the air, and they were talking about a plane having hit the World Trade Center. But nobody knew. Was it a commuter plane that just kind of, was it a small, years earlier we had the story of, or years later we would have the story of Aaron Small, who flew a small private plane into the side of an apartment building. Lost his life in that crash, tragically. So nobody knew what it was. But then the story changed. Another plane had hit the second tower of the World Trade Center. So now you had two towers hit by airplanes. And automatically, whether we knew it or not officially, your brain already shifted to, oh my God, this is terrorism. This is a terrorist attack. We are under attack. And I spent the next 45 minutes in the car hearing the horrific details of these crashes coming in from New York, which again was just, about an hour and a half from where I was, whether I was in New Haven or whether I was in Danbury. And I spent the next 45 minutes in the car driving panicked to this news talk station, Radio 80, WLAD, not WLAD, WLAD. Got to make sure you say it right, Jason. So my old news director, Frank Morrow, used to tell me. It's not WLAD, it's WLAD. And I spent the whole drive just panicked. Oh my God, I'm going to be on the air talking about this in the newscasts throughout the day. We're going to be covering this. I'm 23 years old. Am I ready for this? You're hearing the details. And there's one particular moment from this drive from New Haven up to the radio station. I'll never forget it as long as I live. I'm getting off I-84, the exit in Danbury to go to the radio station. I get off the exit, and you get off the exit ramp, and there's 2 lanes, and I'm at a red light. And I look out the window to my left, and I see a woman sitting in the driver's seat of her car. And I turn to my left and look at her, and I didn't have to know what she was listening to because I could see it in her face. All the life just drained out of her face. She's white as a ghost, and her mouth is agape. And she's listening to the same thing I'm listening to, hearing the same details, undoubtedly, that I'm hearing about these 2 planes crashing into the World Trade Center. And everything else from that day is a blur, but I can remember being on the air, anchoring the news as one of the towers came down and literally telling people that one of the World Trade Centers towers had just collapsed. And I was so panicked and so frantic, even on the air, that my own news director had to calm me down. When I got off the air, he told me, he's like, just calm down. It's not a sporting event. You're not doing play-by-play. You just want to give the facts and the information of what's happening. I was 23 years old, anchoring the news on this terrible day. And then later in the day, I went to the train station in Danbury as people came back from New York. And I remember people getting off the train and the ash still on their shoes. You could look at their shoes and still see the gray. These shoes that were jet black were now this dull gray from the ash and the soot that had sort of permeated its way from people that were in Lower Manhattan that day. And there was, of course, everything else that happened in that day and everything that would follow. But I remember spending, 8 to 10 hours that day in the newsroom, out on the street, interviewing people that had come back from the towers or the area of Lower Manhattan and that sort of thing, and talking about their experiences with me. And I covered the day and everything, and then I drove home. And I'll never forget driving home that day. I remember getting home, walking into the house, walking into my bedroom, and collapsing onto the bed. And then it hit me what had happened. And I sobbed and cried uncontrollably for what seemed like forever. Because I realized in that moment that all of our lives had changed forever. Our whole universe had changed forever. The way we viewed terrorism in this country had changed forever. We thought of something as terrible as, Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh bombing the Murrow building in Oklahoma City. We thought of that as that was incomprehensible. Children died, all of that. And we even had the bombings at the basement of the World Trade Center, which took several lives. But nothing like this. And it's changed our whole way of life in the 22 years since. Department of Homeland Security was formed. You think about the role that plays in our daily lives, not just in terms of terrorism, but patrolling the border or not patrolling the border, however you want to look at it. It's a different world. There's life pre 9/11, there's life post 9/11. For some people, it's the Kennedy assassination. There's life pre the Kennedy assassination, there's life post the Kennedy assassination. For some people, it's watching the space shuttle explode with Terry McAuliffe and a bunch of brave astronauts in the 80s, which was one of those moments for me. There was life before that, life after that. Things you just remember differently. Stick to your conscience. And 9/11 changed the complete trajectory of my career. I had decided in 2001 that I was going to do news, because sports just seemed like such a slog and such a grind that I was gonna work in news. I was a capable writer. I love the news. I love covering it. That I was going to go the route of being a news anchor or reporter, that sort of thing. And then 9/11 happened, and the days and weeks and months following 9/11 were so impactful on me that it just tore me down. It broke me down to the point where everything was so negative and everything was so heavy. The news was so heavy post 9/11 that I walked away from news. I said, I don't want to do it anymore. And there were a bunch of things that happened after that. I decided to go be a communications director for a mayor of the new mayor of Danbury, Connecticut. I would go on and become his communications director. Decided that wasn't for me. Went back to sports. The rest is history. 2003 and beyond. I still miss covering news. But 9/11 was just so heavy. You think about all that. I was watching on, I think it was Nat Geo last night. They had just a marathon of different programs dedicated to 9/11. And all the different aspects of it. And you watch it and it blows your mind, everything that happened that day, the days leading up to it, the days following it. And it all just comes rushing back like it was yesterday. And my brains can be a little scrambled at times because I've had a number of brain injuries. But that day, it just sticks with you. It's just always there. And even last night watching, to bring it all full circle back to sports, I was watching Queen Latifah sing the national anthem before the Giants-Cowboys game. They did such a great job covering it all on NBC last night. And I'm watching Queen Latifah sing the national anthem and all the NYPD members and all the New York Fire Department members that were invited, and they're on the field, and you're listening to the chorus behind Queen Latifah singing with her. And you get choked up, man. I certainly did. And, you get choked up and you get teary-eyed thinking about that day and everything that was lost and how it changed so many lives. It's the way I remember it anyway. That's going to do it for this Monday, September 11th, 2023. The Cash In Daily. Sam Yarnell returns tomorrow. I'm sure he'll be in a gloating mood because he went 3-1 in Page versus the Prince. I went 2-2. This was my whole story last year. I was 500 so many weeks on Page's picks. I'm sure we'll have a fun guest lined up too. Everybody have yourselves a great day, no matter where you are. Make it a great one. I'm Jason Page. Thanks for hanging out. Catch you back here on Tuesday. If you haven't subscribed to the Cash In podcast, please do so on Spotify. Subscribe, leave a comment. If you're not following me on Twitch, Jason Page 77. If you're not following me on X, at the back page. Or you can watch the show on YouTube or Facebook. Just look for the Cash In Daily. I'm Jason. I'll see you back here tomorrow. Bye.